Welcome back to the modern mystic, where we fall asleep beside the lives of history's quiet giants. Tonight, we drift gently into the quiet dawn of Søren Kierkegaard's Copenhagen. We settle by the small wood stove in his narrow apartment, watching the slow birth of day as he did, warming his hands, listening to the low hush of city streets not yet awake, and letting the soft shadows move across the old floors. This isn't a documentary. This is a slow story. We're here to remember how one person shaped the world, not with noise, but with presence, through the ordinary mornings, the warmth of a coffee cup carefully held, the creak of old boards beneath careful steps, the silent order of papers arranged by tired hands. If you've ever felt more at home in the calm of dawn, or found comfort in the repeating patterns of your own ritual, even when the world is rushing by, this story will feel like refuge. This space is yours to rest in. Maybe you'll drift off before we reach the end. That's perfectly all right. Some stories hold us just by walking beside us, letting us pause and remember and rest long before we need to understand them. There's nothing for you to do. You can simply let go now. Let the rhythm of presence be enough. Everything you need tonight can be found in quiet company and the slow, sacred unfolding of another morning in Copenhagen. He drew his first waking breath with the faintest chill curling at the edge of the coverlet. Stillness settled on the room, broken only by the slow rise and fall of Soren's chest. The darkness outside pressed gently at the frosted panes, not yet surrendered to morning. He waited with his eyes closed, feeling the hush of the house, the echo of quiet from street to rafter. The world had not come awake, not yet. Not even the birds, not even the clock on the mantel dared to tick too loudly now. The woolen blanket scratched lightly against his hands as he turned, still holding sleep, not rushing. Every movement had gravity, and nothing wished to rush the day it hadn't met. The old wood floor creaked in its night-warmed silence. Beneath his feet, the cool boards welcomed him, steady and patient. A shallow breath. The air in the room held the vague memory of the stove's heat from the night before, faint as a held note. Outside, a distant carriage passed, its wheels like a sigh on the stones. Soren lay still, listening. Sometimes listening was the waking. He felt for the comfort of ordinary things, the patchwork of his quilt, the soft ache of early chill along the walls, the aching gray before sun. This was the texture of waiting for the world to wake with him. He did not stretch. He simply gathered himself slowly, arms crossing to his chest, hands closing for a moment into fists before loosening on the sheet. The room, narrow and familiar, captured in the milky half-light, smelled faintly of old paper, wood smoke, hints of yesterday's rain drifting through a crack in the window. Nothing had changed, and yet every morning these details arrived like a soft remembering. The quiet was a friend, sprawling through the corners, holding the corners of the ceiling where shadows pooled but did not threaten. Let this moment stretch. He sat up with care, careful not to startle the piece he had found. Each piece of clothing, laid out the night before, waited on the old chair by the door. Linen shirt, worn soft over years, brushed against his skin. Buttons, always slightly mismatched, moved beneath gentle fingers. He did not hurry the fastening. The ritual was the point, the slowness the anchor. His feet found slippers by memory, felt their shape from dozens, hundreds of dawns. Each step to the small stove was deliberate, paused, and measured against the silence. The boards beneath echoed his passage, a hollow music, nothing in a rush. Even the fire waited, coals sunk deep, holding a last glow, patient for kindling. He bent, feeling the leather of his slippers fold. Hands rubbed together for warmth, he found each piece of wood and set it carefully into place, as if the day would unfold according to the symmetry of sticks. The scent of ash clung to his fingers. The snap of pine, the light crackle, drifted up in the half-dark. No need for hurry. There would be time for thoughts later. Let this morning find its own pace. He watched the soft flame build, felt the first tentative warmth as it reached up toward the kettle. The tick of metal, the faint pop of expanding wood, the hush of fabric shifting as he sat again, knees drawn close to the stove's warmth. The world outside stayed gray and distant. The city waited beyond his shutters, but for now the small room and its gentle, aching quiet belonged to Soren alone. Nothing happened, and that was enough. He moved toward the small kitchen nook, slippers brushing over battered floorboards. The morning was still blue and shy, light not yet opening fully. His hands, washed but always stained with some ghost of ink, reached for the coffee tin. The lid made a soft metal sigh, the familiar scrape as beans rolled against tin. He pinched a few, holding them idly between thumb and finger, the cool smoothness pressing into skin. For a quiet minute he waited for nothing at all, eyes half-lidded, listening to the soft ticking of the stove cooling its joints. The hand grinder was small, heavy, wooden, etched with time. Soren placed the beans inside, pressed the lid down, and turned the handle. The first slow grind sent a hush through the room, a rough, steady churn, like stone against stone, waking nothing but the silence. Coffee's scent drifted up, dark, bitter, alive, lingering in the quiet air. He waited by the window, he watched the glass fog a little with his breath. He opened the kettle, dipped it into yesterday's water, let it fill. Cold, old, enough for just one careful cup. Tin met flame, the stove answered with a gentle hiss. The room waited too, slowing, shadows curled at the corners. A mug, slightly chipped but straight-backed, sat on the desk. He fetched it now, warming both palms around its curve. Sometimes he tapped a finger on its side, counting nothing, just feeling the rhythm. Tap it, tap, tap. All around him, the little house exhaled. Wood creaked underfoot. The stove breathed a steady warmth. Somewhere a window rattled faintly, but held. Every sound felt close, softened by the thick Nordic walls. The coffee grounds made low piles in the filter. He poured, unhurried, letting each dark stream settle, pausing so nothing spilled. The aroma curled, deep and almost sweet, mingling with the faint odor of old paper and kindling smoke. The heat fogged the rim. Nothing hurried. Even the city beyond the window moved slow at this hour. He set the mug near his writing spot. He wiped the table with the sleeve of his shirt, careful with every motion. He reached for his quill, a small black feather kept sharpened but comfortingly light, and rolled it between fingers, feeling for its balance. Ink stains marked his blotter. He lined up paper, stacking each sheet with gentle taps, everything in its place. The ink bottle clicked open. He paused. He listened to the scrape of his chair as he eased it back, the hem of his coat brushing the desk. Some mornings he traced the wood grain with his finger. He savored the texture, the grooves, the worn dips, the places his elbow had left a memory. Sunlight climbed very slowly up the edge of his tabletop. He felt it there, a thin warmth finding the room. Let this moment stretch. Even this silence has weight. Feet on the floor, mug in hand, quill ready. Nothing else was needed. For Soren, the ritual itself was the first thought of the day, smells, textures, tiny actions in silent sequence. Some days pass just like this, just warming the world, small motion by small motion, coffee, wood, words, and waiting for nothing at all. He sat at the desk once more, the wood solid beneath his fingertips. The cut of stillness in the room was almost complete, broken only by the hush of his own breathing. A shaft of early light barely caught the rim of his ink pot, glinting blue-black shadows on the scarred desk. There was no hurry, never hurry here. Only the movement of hand over paper, stroke by stroke. The quill rolled under his thumb. Its feather tips grazed the skin of his knuckle. Soren held it not for effect, but out of a comfortable habit, as if it were an extension of his own pulse. Some mornings he twisted it ever so slightly, letting the nib fall soft, then sharp, gathering the rhythm that soothed each waking hour. The scent of ink, metal tang, with an echo of something deeper, lingered near his wrist. The fire ticked and shifted in the stove behind him, embers sifting in their little chamber. Whenever the world pressed too loudly at the window panes, Soren drew quiet inward, letting repetition answer back. Always this: paper, quill, ink, the first pause. He straightened his back in the tall wooden chair, hearing the gentle pop of his spine settling. The city outside might rush or stall. Inside it was only this desk, this moment, the lines on the page before him. The table had a single drawer. He opened it out of habit, though there was nothing new inside. Another sheet of paper, folded corners, worn smooth from handling. Always ready, in case a thought wandered close. A cool draught moved beneath the window frame. Soren drew his robe tighter, the fabric whispering against itself. He placed the tip of the quill to the page and waited, not for inspiration, but for steadiness. There was no race in these mornings. Each gesture repeated the day before: press, drag, lift. Over and over until the surface of the world felt soft again. Let this moment stretch, even when nothing filled the page, he stayed. Presence was the work, the discipline of returning, not to shape words, but to stay upright in the stillness. In and out his breath moved, gentle as the rise of the city's rooftops beyond the window. The pen clinked quietly in the inkwell. He turned it, let it rest. The movement was familiar, reliable, a kind of prayer. He smoothed the cuffs at his wrist, the thin linen worn pale, but always clean. The scraping sound of a chair leg settling on old floorboards became a landmark, a note that told him, I am here. I am doing the work. A carriage rumbled distantly through the square. Soren's eyes flickered to its passing shadow on the wall, then returned to his script. The vowels curved and dipped, ordinary, nothing grand, nothing pressed. Sometimes the words stopped altogether, and he'd simply watch his own hand poised in quiet. The fire in the stove sank a little lower. He reached with one hand to press a fresh splinter into the coals. His mind never hurried the task, lingering in the little ritual. Quill aside, wood in the flames, hands warmed again. He let the smoke curl to where he sat, remembering old winters, how the same repetition bound him year upon year. He waited by the window. Some days the sky grew lighter. Some days it held its gray. The writing did not care. The writing waited for him. It became a mirror, showing him only that he had returned once more to the small labor of his own hands. Nothing happened, and that was enough. He set the quill in its place, always beside the little dish of black ink. The glass bottle, cool to the touch, held just enough for another hour. No hurry. The wood of the desk remembered every motion, smoothed by his habit. He found the next leaf of paper, thin, off-white, edges rough from the last trimming. The page waited. His hand hovered, then settled lightly on the surface, palm meeting a ripple in the grain. He drew in a breath as if to calm the world outside and began again. The tip of the pen dipped into ink, just deep enough to carry a line, then lifted. A bead gathered, dark and liquid, swelling before it touched the page. He let the beginning settle, the silence thicker than the ink itself. With each gentle stroke, he shaped loops and arcs, slow and looping. The pen made a soft scratch, nearly a whisper against the paper. He wrote a phrase once, then paused. He wrote it again, voice barely above a murmur. The words moved through the room like a low chant. Let this moment stretch. He recharged the nib, careful not to spill or blot. That rhythm required no clock, only his senses, the angle of light, the soft ache in his hand, the faint warmth from the stove at his back. Sorting yesterday's papers, he stacked the thoughts of past mornings, careful not to shift the pile too quickly. The corner of one sheet snagged his sleeve, and he paused, righted it, began anew. Even this silence has weight. Outside, a bell told its ordinary hour. He moved slower. A finger brushed away a curl of stray paper. Ink-stained thumb, rough and shining. Repetition became comfort. The ritual carried him past doubt, anchored him inside the hush. He wrote, crossed out, began again. No haste, no audience. The stove clicked as wood settled inward. Some days passed just like this, on the desk, a fresh blotting sheet, always laid to the right. He pressed his palm to it, feeling for dampness, the memory of sentences. His lips shaped the next words before the quill found them. He repeated the phrase, let it return like a tide. Simple tools, simple motions. The quiet, the ink, the feather held between two fingers, familiar as an old coat. He listened for a change in tone, a shift in pressure, the softest resistance as the quill split a letter. He waited by the window, watching the page fill up in slow ripples, each line a slim echo of the one before. There was no need for conclusion, just being present to the next word, the next breath, the next moment. The day outside began, but in here silence became structure. Sorting, choosing, writing again, again, again. Nothing happened, and that was enough. The floor was colder than he remembered, each board holding on to the night's chill long after the sun tried to return. His feet, bare, stiff, rested on the wooden planks for just a moment, catching the sensation, letting it travel up his bones. Soren's first movements were always slow, as if his body spoke the language of winter itself. A thin slant of grey morning settled through the frost-laced window, washing the walls in quiet light. The city outside was still tucked beneath heavy clouds and silent roofs. It was a familiar hush, deepened by the dampness that seemed to press from every stone and seam. Cold air crept around the window frames, curling softly at his ankles. He did not hurry. Every step toward the stove, toward the small chair by the fire, creaked with the weight of another Danish winter. He paused to wrap the woolen shawl tighter around his shoulders and pressed his palms against the gentle heat of the wood stove, feeling how the warmth struggled at first against the deep-set cold. Some mornings the firewood was still sticky from last week's rain. It smoked, reluctant to catch. Soren leaned closer, coaxing small flames out of sleep with a breath and a careful hand. The scent of burning pine and smoke wove through the air, mingling with the old echoes of ink and parchment. Even here, even in this closeness to the stove, the chill lingered at the back of every breath. He waited for the water to boil. The kettle, black and battered, grew warm in the slowest way. Outside, footsteps echoed softly against the cobblestones, a sound thickened by fog, nearly lost in the empty morning. Occasionally, a carriage wheel would move through a puddle, leaving rings that wouldn't thaw until midday. Winter pressed itself into every corner, cracks in the stone, seams in the door, the fibers of his scarf. Soren moved in steady, practiced patterns, never eager, always patient. He seemed to carry the season within him, adjusting the tempo of every gesture to match the hush of Copenhagen's longest nights. He let the cold shape the way he sat, the way he gripped his cup, both hands wrapped fully around the porcelain, breathing into it until the steam shivered against his face. He thought of nothing, or maybe he thought of clouds, of the way the city seemed to fold in on itself beneath the weight of the sky. Let this quiet stretch. The coffee was darker in winter, somehow. He poured it into the cup with little fanfare, letting the heat drift upward. The spoon clinked, slow and mindful. He did not force warmth to arrive. It soaked in minute by minute, as if time itself insisted on being noticed. Some days he watched the frost claim the outer edges of the window, tiny crystals branching outward in the weak daylight. He waited for the light to move an inch across the desk before uncapping his ink. Each morning held a similar emptiness, a waiting, a slow filling, as if the air itself needed to renew before he could. He adapted by not resisting. Soren found refuge in the slowness, letting his thoughts trace the fog as it formed and faded along the rooftops. He moved only as quickly as the morning allowed, never more. If his bones ached, he let them ache quietly. If the cold found his chest, he wrapped another layer and drifted into stillness. Even this silence has weight. Sometimes the damp seeped so deep into the furniture that the paper on his desk felt almost soft to the touch. He would press his palm flat on it, grounding himself to the present moment, breathing in, letting the room's hush fill him. There was nothing to anticipate, no need to chase comfort. He adapted by arriving entirely wherever he was. He waited by the window outside. The winter sun barely reached the tops of the buildings. Inside, Soren's world slowed to the pulse of the stove, the rhythm of breath, the hush of a city reluctant to wake. Hours could pass this way. Nothing happened, and that was enough. He sat quietly, letting the soft spring air seep through the tiny gap in the window. Morning no longer pressed in with icy insistence. The pale gold of dawn stretched its fingers gently now, filling the room with a hush that was neither entirely old nor new. Each day seemed to open a little wider. He could feel it in the floorboards, winter's grown quieting, replaced by something lighter, almost like a breath. The quill rested in his hand, ink glimmered in a glassy puddle. Nothing rushed him, not any more. He slid his fingers over the edge of the paper. The room held a certain green, cold at first light, then warming. Outside, faint birds began their patient rehearsal. Washed in the mild progression of April, the wooden table felt less lonely. Spring sunlight came in waves, not all at once, pooling in broken shapes on the page. He let the minutes spill slow and bright, as if time itself was a small creek winding beneath his desk. A kettle steamed, muted and steady. He waited for the gentle click, signaling the water's readiness. As he moved, slippers whispering over rough boards, he felt the softness of the new season in his knees, his hands. He brought the cup close, its warmth and scent curling upward, something like quiet celebration. The room smelled faintly of last night's ash and fresh earth. He listened, unhurried, to the daylight shifting. It was not a flood, nor a demand. The world seemed willing to let him approach it slowly. Some mornings, the gold lingered longer than he expected. Shadows retreated into corners, making space for thought. Nearby, tree branches tapped the old glass, not a wind, but a gentle insistence of sap rising. With each day, the boundary between inside and outside softened. He pressed his palm to the windowsill, finding a memory of cold, but now it simply yielded to warmth. He turned each object, pausing, arranging quill and ink, stacking blank pages, small rituals that steadied his waking. Nothing more was needed. Only the slow arrival of spring, making the air inside his room open and unfinished. Sometimes his pen would pause mid-sentence, as if words, too, took their time to return. Let this moment stretch some days. The city's pulse arrived on a longer delay. Wheels creaked on cobblestones farther off, voices rose less urgently, muffled by curtains and swollen buds outside. He traced the shallow line of sun as it slipped along the floorboard, a reminder that seasons turned with or without his noticing. His thoughts drifted, not to meaning, but to the comfort of being held in these slow transitions. The light climbed, gently, each morning a fraction longer, a promise stitched into the narrow hours between night and day. He listened for the first sign of early market vendors, their voices drifting at the edge of consciousness. Just echoes soft as flower dust. Nothing happened, and that was enough. He found himself breathing slower near these windows, where spring returned predictably but not without surprise. The wood stove stood unused, its belly cool, a witness to this subtle changing of the guard. In longer daylight, his thoughts moved with less heaviness. Sometimes he imagined the city's breath was in harmony with his own. Even this silence had weight. When evening threatened, it lingered. The twilight stretched on behind rooftops, slow as spilt honey. Sometimes he wrote in that waning light, letting the letters slip into dusk, unhurried, surrounded by the hush of a world neither fully waking nor sleeping. He did not hurry, and neither did the day. He held this rhythm as a kind of company, not expecting, not resisting. Somewhere outside, the earth turned again, stretching the distance between sunrise and sunset a little farther each morning. He waited by the window, letting even the smallest changes mark the hours. He tasted the season in his tea, felt it in the bones of the chair. Each day left behind something soft, and little by little he allowed it to echo through his own slow arrival into the day. Some mornings lasted longer, and he let them. Soren sat by the window as morning slipped between the thin curtains, the city's sound muffled in a world still half asleep. He pressed his palms together, warming them in the hush that comes before anyone calls your name. The chair beside him held the faint dip of another's presence, real or remembered. It was never quite clear to him. Each day began here with a weightless kind of company. There were letters, folded and tucked between the pages of half-filled journals. Some he had written for others but never sent. His script wandered close and careful. Dear friend, or sometimes simply a name standing alone. Ink bled through the thin paper. The words curled around thoughts he would not say aloud, not even to the stove or the morning air. He let his fingers wander along the edge of an old envelope, reading an answer that was never written. A distant bell rang somewhere deeper in Copenhagen. The street below shuffled with the slow promise of other people waking. Soren's breath moved in soft, steady patterns, not a sigh, but an exhale that fed the silence. He remembered walking city streets with a friend whose laughter came and went with the wind. They had paused at corners, not to talk, but to listen for what lived in the spaces between conversation. Soren let the memory fill the small room. Resting his elbows on the scarred wood table, he looked across at the empty chair again. Some mornings he imagined it filled a beloved friend, a distant sister, even a stranger. He let his mind cradle these presences, not in longing, but as a gentle echo of closeness past. The candle stub beside him wore a fingerprint smudged in wax, someone else's, pressed there in another season. He didn't move it. Instead, he turned the cup in his hands, letting the heat drift up, familiar and forgiving. Let this moment stretch. Overhead, a floorboard creaked, a neighbor rising to tend their own rituals. Soren's attention followed the sound, a tiny thread connecting his solitude to theirs. In the soft hush before the city truly woke, there was always someone else nearby, even if he would never speak their name. He watched the dust float through a slant of light and recalled the warmth of another's coat draped across the back of a chair. A simple kindness. The memory still held its warmth. He wrote little notes to himself sometimes on the back of receipts or scraps of brown paper. Reminders, questions, or just single words. Stay, breathe, listen. Each one a quiet bridge back to his gentler self, to those who had smiled at him in quieter times. He waited by the window on some mornings. He imagined conversations drifting into the room, a question, a shared look, laughter barely above a whisper. The memory of a friend's hand on his shoulder, too brief to seem real, but enough to soften the edges of being alone. Even this silence was full, not with sorrow, but with care stitched slowly into the threads of what was gone and what remained. Nothing happened, and that was enough. Soft echoes wandered the room, footsteps in the hallway, a pigeon settling on the windowsill, the faint warmth where two cups once stood close together. Soren folded his hands and waited for the world to arrive, or not. He let every relationship, distant or imagined, take its place quietly in the morning, not demanding, but present, like the gentle hush before a bell rings again. He sat at his little table, the ink drying in its glassy pool. The logs in the stove split and settled. In the room's hush, faint echoes hummed behind the quiet. This hour, between the world and himself, belonged to slow remembering, faces and voices that passed without weight, still circling inside him. His father's presence settled like the early dusk, not as a memory of lessons or stories, but as heaviness in the air. There had always been a coat left on the peg, boots set neatly by the stove. Soren could sense the creak of his father's footsteps, always measured, traveling the same worn boards. The air changed with them, the silence parting for just a moment. His father's hand on his small shoulder was weathered and sure, and though time thinned its warmth, still Soren felt it, some mornings, in the chill before the stove's heat caught on his coat. The paper sat smooth and cold under his palm. He waited by the window. Outside, another day trembled awake, carriages outpacing dawn's mist, boots brushing frost from cobblestone. He let that hush sweep the room again. Even now the voices of shopkeepers returned, not as words but as shapes, soft hellos, a greeting mumbled through a scarf, the careful watch of a grocer arranging fruit trays just after sunrise. Not friendships, but recognitions. Connections stitched together, thin as the breath on a cold pane. Let this moment stretch. The woman who sold him bread each morning had hands dusted with flour, fingers quick and kind as she wrapped his loaf in brown paper. Once she had smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening like the creases on a folded letter. That smile lived only in memory, a faint glow repeating itself as he broke his bread, steam rising from its soft heart. The postman's voice, always the same gentle Gardmorgen, floated through the fog of waking hours. A hat tipped in the hall, a letter pressed into his hand. Some days Soren heard laughter downstairs, the sound muffled by wood and distance, ordinary happiness belonging to someone else. The city's soft chorus carried into his solitude, steps in the stairwell, carriages rattling, morning vendors calling their slow, habitual music. Nothing happened, and that was enough. Soren's pen rested on the blank page. Past conversations replayed, not for meaning, but for rhythm. The lull of his father's reading, the neighbors humming through an open window, echoes caught in the folds of morning cloth. Even now, as the room filled with stove warmth and the scent of yesterday's ash, each sound belonged to the gentle procession of people passing through memory, leaving nothing to explain, only the presence of others in the tapestry of each waking day. He let that quiet fill him, the world outside moving at its own humble pace. There was no need to hold tightly to any face or phrase. The echoes swayed in soft relief, woven with the early light. Even this silence had weight. It pressed softly against his shoulders, warm as a remembered embrace. Some mornings this was all he needed: a room, a window, the embered hush of distant voices, and the sacred ordinariness of everyone briefly appearing, then gone. No meaning was required, just presence, memory like fog settling over familiar boards. He closed his eyes. The old floor creaked. Outside, footsteps faded into the morning. A quiet day began with no reason to hurry. Soren was awake before the city, sitting in his small room with pale morning light on his hands. There was nothing to do and nowhere to be. The wood stove kept its gentle pulse in the corner, a slow warmth drifting through his simple space. He stared at the worn pattern on the rug and listened to the creak of the old boards, faint and familiar underfoot. Each movement was deliberate, standing only to reach for the teapot, letting the steam rise and curl, setting it back down. All around him, nothing asked for urgency. He poured hot water over the grounds, the scent rising sharp and bitter, then softer as the coffee settled. A spoon rested in his palm for a moment too long before stirring. He carried the cup in both hands to the little table near the window. Dust shimmered, caught in a thin beam. The city breathed in distant hushes, wheels on cobblestone, voices behind heavy doors, a cart passing somewhere beyond the walls. Soren did not look for meaning in it. Some mornings passed in quiet geometry, the slow circling of a spoon, the steady fold of a napkin, footprints that faded as quickly as they were made. Time slipped quietly. He sat, listening to the faint shuffle below the window, the slow sigh of the stove. The world seemed barely moved. One hand wrapped around his cup, he thumbed through pages of old notes, pencil marks faint, corners creased, nothing urgent there either. Lines written long ago carried no pressure. Not every day was made for effort. A clock ticked. Cooled ash settled beside the kindling. Soren sipped, then set the cup back in its ring on the table. There was no rush. He watched a spider wind a lazy path across the wall, pausing, turning, then retreating where the morning couldn't reach. The spoon clinked softly as he shuffled it aside. Everything asked for slowness. Even waiting became its own rhythm. The taste of coffee lingered, edging toward bitterness, then quieting again. He bent his head, reading a line twice, then reading it once more for the calm it offered. Some sentences wanted to be lived inside, not solved. Let this moment stretch. Beyond the pain, the city brightened. Soren pushed a few notes into a simple pile, letting the order form itself. Memory drifted back without force. He watched the light moving across the table's grain. Nothing happened, and that was enough. He stood and paced 3 steps, the sound small and dull. No destination, just the slow back and forth of someone alive within their own quiet. The stove's heat breathed against his knee. He watched his hand rest finally on the quill, but left it. No words asked to be written yet. There was nothing to miss. Every corner was known, each shadow understood. Daylight filled the room like a slow tide, neither demanding nor abrupt. He opened the window just enough for air to brush his cheek. Smoke folded upward, then vanished. The wind carried it before he could care. Even this silence had weight. Soren let his thoughts come and go, unhurried. The wood grain beneath his fingertips, the cloth of his shirt, the coolness gathering at his ankles as the fire faded. He did not seek significance. One day could be nothing at all, but the stillness was real lasting. He watched the sky drift beyond the rooftops. He sipped again, breath slow. Nothing else was needed. He picked at small bread on a plain ceramic plate. No butter, no urgency. The crust gave way under his fingers, leaving soft crumbs scattered along the tabletop. Between bites, he watched steam rise from a chipped blue cup. The coffee inside had cooled, but still tasted of morning, still echoed the rituals of that early silence. Rain moved over the windows, a gentle tapping, as if reminding the walls to breathe. The metal of the tin roof made each drop sound like a tiny footstep. Blankets, folded with slow hands earlier in the day, stayed neatly stacked near the stove. They held the memory of warmth, though no one had used them since waking. Slippers waited by the hearth, slightly apart, toes turned toward each other. The fire inside had faded to a shallow glow, a bed of soft embers, flickering but not demanding. He returned to the table, moving his cup in a slow circle, as if tracing invisible lines of thought. The spoon, clean and cool now, rested against porcelain. Hours passed that way. He did nothing extraordinary. He watched the way the shadows bent across the faded floorboards. They drifted, lazy, as the gray of day shifted to the deeper blue of afternoon, then paused in the light before dusk. He ate quietly, little meals, one after another, never rushed. Apples cut and set on a napkin, a piece of old cheese, a handful of walnuts. Each bite was its own ceremony. There was no conversation, no hurry, only the steady echo of repetitive gestures. Bread torn, coffee sipped, spoon replaced. He listened for nothing in particular, only the slow rain, only his own steady breathing. Let this moment stretch. Outside, the city life swirled in distant echoes. A cart's wheel, a shout muffled by water, a dog barking. They slipped through the window's old glass, soft as shadows, then disappeared. Here inside, it always returned to quiet. He folded a blanket, dusted crumbs to the floor, placed his slippers carefully side by side. Each action was like a prayer said without words, a day spent repeating the smallest kindness for no one but himself. He waited by the window, rain running in slow rivers down the pane. Nothing happened. That was enough. Evening pressed gently against the walls, the tabletop smoothed by hands, the hearth swept for the second time, as if tidiness might lull the coming hours to sleep along with him. The space felt smaller at dusk, but softer, too. Folding, placing, waiting, watching, actions repeating, gentle as rain. A pane of glass caught faint morning light, its cold edge lined with dew. Soren sat by the window, turning a worn cuff against the chill, his gaze slow as fog lifting above damp cobblestones. The street below barely stirred. Only a stray cartwheel, a dog's distant yawn. Days like this, empty of events, gathered softly about him. He let his fingers rest on the sill, feeling the small pulse of warmth left from yesterday's sun. Silence spilled over everything, the desk, the unlit stove, the stack of blank pages. And in breath, no hurry. Stillness settled like sediment, quiet and forgettable, yet every hour tucked away in a layered hush. A kettle waited, water barely trembling before dawn. The grey light painted the wood floor in slow stripes. He picked up a mug. The smooth curve fit in his palm, simple, ordinary, just there. Scents of old firewood and the faintest hint of bread curled from the next room. Nothing urgent waited for him, nothing dramatic or new. Sometimes Soren just watched the wall, one knothole shaped like a boat, another like a sleeping fox. Dust motes drifted, turning invisibly. The world was unchanged by his sitting. His mind, mostly quiet, rolled with odd thoughts, half-thoughts, really, that never made their way to paper. Let this moment stretch. The ink still slept, capped and untouched. Paper stayed crisp and empty. He put no pressure on himself to begin. A single sparrow called, then stopped. Even the city seemed tired. Day after day, sameness gathered. A sweater rebuttoned, a coin turned over, a pair of boots lined up by the door. Some days passed just like this, inside. A gentle waiting hummed. Sometimes he wondered if he was wasting time. Sometimes he just listened to the tick of the clock, noting the way its rhythm matched nothing in particular. He let his thoughts walk nowhere special, and with every wandering, a quiet shape formed, slow as stones settling in a river. The world outside turned a page he could not read. Inside, Soren's mind thickened with patient layers, every uneventful morning building into memory. He waited by the window. That was enough. He leaned over the walnut desk, tracing soft circles on the wood with the side of his thumb. A new bottle of ink, still cool from the outdoors, waited to be opened. He weighed it in his palm, feeling the slight chill, the small glass sweating against his skin as morning light crept up the walls. The cork pressed softly beneath his thumb, steady and slow, the pop muffled, almost apologetic, as if careful not to disturb the air too much. Just across the room, two shirts and a woolen undershirt sat folded on the rush chair, each edge lined up carefully, smoothed by hands that lingered far longer than necessary. His knuckles moved across the linen in a measured rhythm, folding once more for no reason but quiet attention. A sleeve straightened, a hem pressed flat. The seat of the chair creaked gently under the weight of this small, patient work. Nothing hurried, nothing changed in any sudden way. The ritual of ink was never simply about the words. He watched the inky swirl gather on the nib, breathing out through his nose. As it soaked up into the bristles, his mind settled, tethered to the work of now. One elbow rested on the desk. The street was just beginning to blink awake, a slow market cart, a single voice, the grate of wooden wheels beyond the window's glass. He didn't look up. These sounds grounded him, folding into the quietness of the room. By the stove, socks hung on a rod, drying from yesterday's walk. The wool was thick and uneven, rough at the heel. He pressed the fabric between his fingertips, testing for dampness, refolding each sock one atop the other. No rush, no sense of next, only the simple order of things, slowly restored, then undone, then restored again. He returned the laundry to its place in the chest beneath the window. The lid thudded softly, muffling a yawn that escaped him. Dust motes turned inside the thick slice of sunlight, patient, unhurried, mocking the calm between chores. Even these idle moments became invisible teachers, reminding him that presence needed no justification. The ritual of shopping for ink was the same every week. His footfall on wet cobbles, the muted greetings inside the tiny shop on Crystalgate. Fingers brushed glass bottles on wooden shelves, searching for just the right weight, the bottle with a cap firm but not too tight. Shop bells, door hinges, the soft murmur of a clerk wrapping the nest of tissue around the bottle. Each became part of his weekly remembering. Every bottle identical, every walk different. This is the way habits bend, thought quietly, like water shaping stone over years. He set the ink by the window, letting the wax seal catch the sun. Breath slowed, stretching with the hollowed calm that comes with a task completed. In this room, nothing truly finished. Even the most ordinary moments circled back, changed shape, became another part of himself knit quietly together. He let the city's muffled movement seep through the glass, steady as heartbeat, steady as the weight of laundry left to dry. Some days were nothing but small repetitions, a button unfastened, a page turned sideways, a drawer closed gently and then opened again. Routines became a soft undercurrent, holding him up when the world felt too deep to wade into directly. He stood by the sill, palm on cool wood. A pigeon flicked feathers just outside. Somewhere a bell sounded noon, but in here time moved like honey left near the fire, slow, golden, refusing to spill. He watched the light shift across the floor. Let this moment stretch. It needed no purpose but being lived again and again. He sat once more, uncapping the ink for the afternoon's thoughts. The bottle felt different now, faintly warmed. The dampness faded, the seal broken. There was something grounding in this ordinariness. Every new beginning rose from these quiet, often boring repetitions, layering his heart with patience where others saw only monotony. He saw something else, the slow, sturdy foundations of a mind resilient enough to weather any storm. Even this silence has weight, let nothing hurry. He sat in the stillness, hands resting lightly on rough wool trousers, the fire's glow rising and falling across the room. The morning fell quiet around him, as if the city had forgotten to wake. There were no footsteps, no voices through thin wood walls, just the hush of his own breath, slow, even filling the space like smoke from the old stove. A single chair by the table, its legs uneven on the worn floorboards. He adjusted it by habit, never rushing, letting the scrape sound out into the emptiness. There existed a comfort here, in spaces shaped solely by his own touch. He moved a candle closer, flame flickering against thin porcelain. His cup steamed quietly in the hush. He watched it, hands curled around warmth, and the city outside remained blurred and distant. He arranged his papers in soft stacks, each page lined up neat, corners meeting, faintly ragged edges worn through use but cared for. The feathered end of a quill rested near his wrist. He faced no audience. He spoke aloud only to the fire. and the gentle weight of this silence became a companion. He let it settle, let it breathe its way around the stove, along the grain of the tabletop, across the backs of his hands. Let this moment stretch. Some might say solitude was a form of retreat. For him, it was design, chosen, persistent, attended to with the same care as a clock wound each night. The room did not echo with laughter or argument, yet its quietness felt full, as if each object knew its place. No need for explanations, no one else to shape the air. He exhaled. Steam curled, then faded. The floor creaked overhead, then stilled. He listened, but only for a heartbeat before returning to his small sphere. The walls, worn paint, the slight drafts that moved his papers if he left them unattended. Even the shadow in the corner belonged to him alone. Each morning repeated the same sacred choreography, offering him the safety of pattern, familiar steps cushioned by time. He waited by the window, outside. Hints of the world showed up. A distant wheel against cobblestones, a bark of laughter muffled by brick. Community would always remain other, elsewhere. The city's presence for him was background sound, a score for what it meant to be alone, but never lonely. He sipped, then set the cup down, aligning it just so beside the inkwell. He reminded himself to breathe, to notice the warmth on his palms, to hold the room in his senses as a monk would cradle solitude. Neither fled from nor clung to, but named and known, until emptiness became its own gentle teacher. Nothing happened, and that was enough. The air thickened with the scent of cooled ash, linen, and the faintest trace of roasted beans. Awareness found him, not as a sharpened blade, but as a blanket. The familiar design of quiet, woven strand by strand, made the room holy by its very ordinariness. Let even this silence have weight. So he sat, again, letting solitude gather around him, a sacred space, unchanged by need, untroubled by absence. He made his tea, his world, his hours. And in the slow opening of each day, he found everything he needed was already with him. The stillness deepened. Nothing more was required. He set the cup down and pulled on his coat, the fabric soft and worn from so many gentle mornings. The street was cool just beyond the door, cobblestones damp from the hush of early mist. He moved without hurry, hat fitted, scarf arranged, the boots pressing slow memories into stone. The streetcar bell clanged somewhere 2 blocks over. At this hour, only a few souls drifted through. The stack of loaves at the bakery, a boy guiding a broom, a woman raising her shutters to let in the day. Soren walked beneath crooked facades, his hands wrapped around themselves in his pockets, thinking only of the sound of each step. In a small cafe, the bell rang again. Low, a hush. Chairs scraped. He chose a table at the back, beside the window streaked with last night's rain. The coffee here was weaker, but the porcelain cup warmed his palms all the same. Strangers moved around him in slow patterns, coins traded, spoons stirring in porcelain, pages of a newspaper quietly creased. No one looked too long at another. Solitude, even here, stretched like a shawl over every shoulder. He waited, listening to the clink of glass, the distant call of streetcar wheels on rails. The city's rhythm pressed at the pane, muffled by glass and the comfort of sitting still. He jotted a note on a scrap of paper, the act itself enough to anchor him. The cafe faded into the gentle sameness of mornings everywhere, a space where loneliness never rose above the hum of routine. Let this moment drift. Let the hush hold every thought. Down the street, the bookstore owner pulled open her door. The brass handle gleamed in the new light. Soren thanked the server, coat brushed smooth again, and stepped into the grey calm. The bell above the bookshop door trilled, a thread of sound, small and bright. He stepped inside. The air in here smelled of dust, old spines, the hint of leather and paper. Shelves rose in awkward towers. He wandered past, fingertips grazing the rough edges. Unread sermons, small treatises, a volume of poems with foxed pages. The owner nodded from her stool, eyes half closed with slumber. A cough, someone's footfalls on the wooden floorboards. Very little happened here. Soren set a book aside, returning the weight to its shelf. He drifted toward the window, watching the trams beyond, warmth in his chest from the hush of so many unread words. This was company, the silent, patient kind that asks nothing and stays long after you leave. Let even the noises grow thin, let the hush become a shelter. He stepped into the street once more, pockets a bit heavier, spirit a little closer to rest. The city continued, its bells, its carts, its soft mutter of beginnings. No one pulled him close nor held him at a distance. Solitude lay beneath everything, an undercurrent. Community, a brief ripple on the surface. He made his slow return along quieter lanes, breathing the smell of cedar and candle wax from open doors. Shadows stretched by noon, but his own remained close, a companion steady and sure. The door to his rooms eased open. He stepped inside, letting the hush settle again, the stillness closing around him like a threadbare cloak. The kettle waited, the window blurred with light. His steps, so careful hours ago, now simply moved toward the stove. Even in the heart of the city, it was possible to return, to let the world contract to the space of one small table, a single flame, the weight of hands folded in thought. Nothing happened, and that was enough. He returned to his desk as the sky slipped toward dawn, a quiet, familiar shape in the near dark. The desk stood where it always stood, its home beneath the small window, never moving, steady as breath. The wood bore the hush of many mornings. Soren did not need to see it to recognize its corners, its shallow drawer with the simple iron handle. The handle was smoothed by years of touch, cool in the first hour before the fire warmed the room. His fingers hovered there, a private habit, tracing the curve, not to open, but to remember. The air held a faint scent of wood smoke and ink, barely lifting from the grain. He settled his hands on the surface. There was stillness in how he placed his palms flat, in the slow arc of his wrists as he gathered himself before beginning anything. In the wood, a story lived, grooves, scratches, places stained a little darker where coffee met paper. Near the front edge, a thin line traced the length, almost a scar. His finger ran along it, pausing at the shallowest dip, a small hollow worn by years of restlessness. He stopped there without thinking, letting the desk greet his skin. Nothing more happened, not for a while. A faint glow from the dying coals moved across the desk's surface, soft and uneven. He watched it as if it might spell his name. In the hush, the old patterns revealed themselves, lines crossing, swirling, small constellations of scratches. He had memorized many of them, and each morning he welcomed the same clusters as old companions. Let this moment stretch. The desk did not need to be beautiful or rare. Its order came from use, from the patience of presence. Even the sound of fingernails gently rapping near the inkwell, steady, deliberate, a code between wood and human. He breathed out, letting the tiny echoes return. Some days passed just like this, the desk as a quiet altar. Soren might close his eyes, steadying himself before thought, feeling the simple comfort of return. The thick legs of the desk pressed softly into the floorboards, holding everything in place. From the open window, a breeze collected small shavings of dust, settling them in the old grooves, the lightest of reminders that the world continued beyond this room. He waited by the window, letting the desk's order arrange itself around his quiet intention before he reached for paper, before he poured the first ink. Nothing hurried here, nothing asked. Even this silence has weight. The desk stood where the morning light fell first. Its surface caught the gold before anything else, before the kettle steamed, before footsteps touched the rug. He placed it close enough to the window to hear when the city awoke, far enough to keep his own breath from fogging the glass. The old wood held the scent of oil and ink, softened by years of open air, and the cool notes drifting through the seam in the sill. He would trace the scar on its edge with his finger while waiting for the coffee to brew. The grain ran uneven, like wind folding old meadows, each curve a memory of use. Some mornings it smelled sharply of lemon if the sun was strong. On rainier days it thickened with the earthy damp that crept up from the street below. Let this detail linger, familiar, silent. The quill had its own spot, always horizontal, always the nib cushioned by the folded rag he kept from last winter. Ink laid close, capped and dark, patient until the first line needed writing. His notebooks, stacked with their edges squared for habit's sake, formed their own small landscape across the desk. In this constellation of objects, movement felt like ritual. Some mornings, footsteps would cross the paneled floor and send shadows reaching beyond the feet. Frost at the window sharpened the wood's rich smell, almost smoky, as if the stove inside and the chill outside met right in the grain. Even the sound of his sleeve brushing the tabletop sounded softer here, as if the desk understood its duty to hold, to anchor, to wait. He left the window cracked in spring, wooden sills swelling and contracting, letting the city's wet newness drift in. In winter, breath lingered above the desktop, a lingering mist among the scattered candle stubs and ink bottles. Each season had its own weight in the room, but the desk held them equally, patient and unchanged. Some mornings passed without writing. The desk remained, silent and attentive, its presence marking the start of something, even if nothing came. He waited by the window, let the quiet stretch between knuckles, between breath and page. Nothing happened, and that was enough. The chair beneath him had sunk more deeply into the floorboards. Soren sat there, early and late, as the touch of years quieted his mornings, lengthened his evenings. The room was not silent. It settled with the small complaints of wood, the occasional whisper of wind curling between shutters, the old sighs of shoes beneath his feet left quietly beside the hearth. In this slower dawn, the world seemed to arrive at its own pace. Coffee would not rush. The kettle took its time, water shivering but never boiling too quickly. He watched the thin ribbons of steam soften the window panes, clouding the line between stone alleys outside and his small library within. The scent of roasted beans hung heavier now, deeper in the grain of the oak table, in the soft wool of his shawl, in his own careful breath. There were mornings where Soren lingered over the grinding of beans, pressing the pestle slow, waiting for the flowery rattle of the mortar. He listened as the shape of time filled out, as if aging itself gave the room a richer presence, a hush threaded with memory and the hunger of wanting. Sometimes he let the silence collect on his tongue, tasting it between sips. He waited by the window, Not everything demanded ink these days. The quill rested longer in its glass. Paper held the even weight of his hand, unhurried, more gentle. He looked at the old ink pot, half full, and the way time marked its surface with rings left by years of use. These small marks, quiet and circular, seemed truer than words. The spoon clinked against the cup, her dust moved with the light, slow and sure, swirling above the stove and settling where it pleased. The air carried the thick, honeyed perfume of old firewood, of the city's distant bakery opening, of paper gone yellow at the edges. No footsteps hurried across the floor. Even the clock, with its winding tick, seemed less eager to announce the hour. He let his eyes rest on the street below. There, the first delivery cart ambled along, the wheels clattering softly over cobblestone. A fruit vendor called out, his voice like a faraway bell, rising just enough to break the hush, then fading back into the soft hold of Copenhagen's morning. Nothing happened, and that was enough. He listened for his own breath. Sometimes it echoed back, almost unfamiliar in its calmness. The weight of years had slowed the need to move, to answer, to finish. There was no more chasing after the day, only the gentle arrival of each small hour. Even this silence has weight. Now, his hands lingered longer by the stove, absorbing its warmth. The ache in his knuckles no longer pressed urgency upon him. He traced a finger along the teacup's curved rim, savoring its smoothness, its reminder that in time everything softens, everything endures traces. The window pane caught his gaze again, old paint cracked and peeling. Outside, frost feathered the glass in small, beautiful arcs. He let his focus drift, as if looking through both present and memory, a layering of now and what was. Some mornings passed just like this. The scent of old books, of wool, of turning seasons circled quietly through the room. He let himself drift toward longing, but not with sadness, just a gentle wishing for familiar voices, for the echo of laughter, for the fragile joy of being missed in the space between moments. The fire hissed as it settled, and so did he. There was more room now to sit quietly, to do less, to observe as time curled its way into every corner, as longing itself became a presence, a soft shawl draped across his shoulders, weightless but known. He waited by the window, even as the city woke all around him. He stood by the window, his hands folded quietly behind his back, watching the brief flutter of morning light catch on the rim of a cup. The small stone street outside carried only a stray cat, slow and unsure, pausing where the shadows broke in the first brightness of the day. Soren did not look for letters in the post or faces at the door. What he watched for was nothing in particular, only the gentlest tremor of a moment slipping away. The floor creaked beneath him with each gentle shift of weight, old wood remembering every day that had come before. His breath clouded slightly on the window pane. The room behind him was a hush of soft gray, touched by the faintest warmth from the stove. The tip of his finger traced a circle in the glass, not wiping, only sketching what faded as soon as it appeared. He waited against the glass, as if the passing of another hour could be seen, or felt, or at least accepted. Slowness curled around him much like the coil of steam from his coffee, present, necessary, easy to overlook until it's gone. He let his mind drift, never far, not longing for some great loss or old friend, but for the ways mornings once startled him awake, for the days when sun spilled across the desk before he even sat down, and the promise of ink and purpose pulled at him like a loose thread. Now there was only this slow, deep breathing, the patient waiting, the humility of expecting little more than warmth and stillness. A chair shifted as he sat. The seat carried an old imprint, decades deep. His fingers rested on the wood, cool from the night. He let them lie there, not urging the day forward, letting his pulse slow to the cadence of the house. The clock ticked without hurry from another room. There was no need to look at it. There was nothing he could miss. Now even longing itself was quiet, not urgent, not cutting. He found himself waiting for a certain shadow, one that crossed the kitchen wall only in late winter, thin and long, or for the hollow sound of wind against the corners, the kind that used to unsettle him, now only a reminder that the city, too, was growing old and gentle. A blanket rested on the edge of the bed, always there, though he rarely pulled it over his knees before noon. He looked at its folds, traced the little lines in the weave, and remembered touching the same fabric years before. Even this, the simple act of noticing, stretched across time, reaching to hold the memory of mornings that smelled of different firewood, deeper snow outside, livelier sounds of waking. Let this quiet settle, let even the wanting become another flame in the slow, steady hearth of his life. He waited for nothing, but that in itself became its own gentle ritual. The city would not rush him. No visitor knocked. A page might go untouched until afternoon. He leaned back, closing his eyes against the pale light that came and went as clouds wandered across the sky. Behind his lids, he felt again the smallest aches of time, those evenings when laughter used to echo beneath the eaves, the dim memory of boots drying by the fire, of voices that needled just outside the window, calling him to join the world. The clock sighed in its way, carrying the weight of many mornings, and Soren stayed right where he was, letting the rhythm of waiting itself become enough. The blanket on his knees, the cool air pressed gently at the doorframe, never quite entering. Nothing happened, and that was enough. Soren wandered through a hallway not quite his own, old wood underfoot, the grains shifting at each step, every board remembering another season of cold. He moved carefully, as if every sound from his shoes might awaken something sleeping beyond the walls. His hand brushed the smooth edge of a door frame, familiar but blurred, the paint chipped and soft, holding the memory of many winters. He paused here, fingertips resting, feeling the coolness of morning even inside this drift of memory. Somewhere behind him, a kettle whistled in a room that flickered between yesterday and a further past. The scent of coffee hovered, gentle and persistent. He turned, and the narrow corridor opened into a sitting room barely lit by a window too old to catch the full sun. All around him, chairs waited in silence, the upholstery bearing the imprint of afternoons long faded, a scarf abandoned, a book with its pages breathing quietly open. Soren's shoes, old leather, the seams darkened by city rain, rested beside the hearth. He bent down, lifting one as if it weighed more than memory alone. He studied it, tracing the scrapes along the toe where the cobblestones of Copenhagen had left their mark. Let this moment stretch. There was no hurry in this place. Even the air moved slowly, curling around him like a forgotten coat. He walked across faded rugs, the patterns growing deep and indistinct beneath the shadows. Dust swirled in the slant of light, each mote moving with purpose, then drifting away. Outside the window, the city murmured in a language he only half remembered. Sounds of wheels and footsteps echoed softly, filtered through time, gentle as distant rain. Soren pressed his palm to the cool glass. Condensation bloomed and faded in the shape of his hand, present, then gone. Even this silence has weight. He let his eyes drift closed. Instead of darkness, he saw the flicker of past mornings. The kitchen table with a single piece of bread, candle wax trailing along the edge, the soft scratch of a quill beside his plate. Old shoes carried him through each room. Every threshold, every window, every quiet meal layered one over the next, neither past nor present, only the comfort of returning. Some days passed just like this. He sat by the stove, hands stretched toward warmth not quite real but welcome all the same. The wood popped, echoing quietly, as if acknowledging his presence. Chairs waited. Shadows lingered. Bread cooled on the sill. He moved through it all, slower now, letting the fog of memory gather and part, never fully leaving, never fully clear. He waited by the window as city echoes folded into the hush. A feather drifted downward, catching the faintest edge of invisible breath, gliding through the haze of somewhere not wholly dream, not wholly dawn. Soren's foot found the first stone step, cool, lightly dusted with the frost of memories left out overnight. He lingered there, letting his weight press the surface, feeling how stillness could settle into the curve of the world, the way mist curls around an old stair before morning. Somewhere a fog pressed against the glass, refusing to lift. Every sound held in thick linen. No hurry, no name. He passed from one shadowed landing to another, trailing his hand along the wall, sensing its chill through his sleeve. The steps did not creak tonight. They received him with quiet, as if the house itself wished to rest. Let this moment stretch, like lingering at the threshold before answering the day. He lingered in the hush beyond waking. His fingers paused on a banister worn soft by years of passage. He looked up, not needing to see what waited above. He allowed the question to remain suspended. Nothing happened, just a hush that filled the world. The feather turned slowly in the fog, sometimes caught in a draught, sometimes settling on light that did not come through windows but simply glowed without source. Soren watched the movement, his gaze unhurried, without expectation. Sometimes he wondered if stillness could be held like a stone, weighty, real, set tenderly at the center of his chest. There was something of relief in that emptiness, the world folding itself into a gentle gray. The lamp on the landing, unlit, did not mind its purpose abandoned. He waited on the stair, listening for the sound of tiny feet or the scratch of tree on the roof, but heard only his own breath, steady and slow. The fog pressed closer around his shoulders, asking nothing of him, offering nothing but itself. Even the stairs seemed to sink, becoming less firm, more like the air, more like rest. Some days passed just like this, stone beneath his heel, cool air at his collar, feather circling in the unseen draughts. He did not move quickly. The world outside stayed distant, its noises blunted by the thick, dreaming quiet. Every thought slowed, swaying like a lantern on a still night. His foot found another step. He stepped down, not toward a room, but into an atmosphere where all purpose fell away. He carried nothing into this space, not paper, not quill, not the weight of warm hands or the scent of coffee, just himself, as empty and as whole as morning. Even this silence has weight, a feather's landing on a wide stone stair, the soft drift of fog around the ankles, the world as it paused and paused again, his presence, patient and unseen, settling deeper with each heartbeat. Nothing happened, and that was enough. He let his hands rest, fingers curling like quiet leaves upon the grey wool blanket. The fire in the small stove faded to a gentle glow, barely whispering now, Shadows moved along the old wood boards, soft edges losing their boundaries, slow tides of darkness rolling inward with every breath. The world seemed to step back, leaving only the hush of familiar objects blurring at the edges. There was the feathered quill, distant now, the dented ink pot, its edge shining in memory more than sight. Cups on the chipped tray, retreating into the only light left, which was not from candles, but from thought growing calmer, smaller, slower. He stretched his toes under the edge of the blanket. The night exhaled, so long, so slow, almost without sound. His chest followed, breathing out into the room. Above, the ceiling beams softened into shadow, shapes losing their names. Even the clock lost count of itself. Let this moment lengthen. He blinked once, twice. Each blink a longer pause, each pause a gentle sway toward dreams. The world's weight seemed to grow lighter, unraveling at the edges. There was a slow comfort in this dimness, a world familiar but not requiring attention. Tilting his head, he felt the pillow cradle him. His hands surrendered their ache to the sheets, palms opening like petals at rest. The smell of smoke